All right, everybody, welcome to the first February 2023 Tinderbox meetup. The typical format of the meetup is we go around the room and new people introduce themselves, and then we move on to people talking about their projects. Then if we have a scheduled theme for the month, we'll go through that, and then otherwise we'll just talk about different topics. We will, and why don't we start something new too before we do the introductions? Does anybody have any agenda topic they would like to add? I'll start with one. Is if we don't have anything else to do today planned, I think it would be a fun exercise to work on a project that someone on the community asked for, which was how do I do a trash can in Tinderbox? And I thought we could actually model building trash can like functionality in Tinderbox and discuss the requirements and the thoughts and issues around that. I think there's a lot of good abstract thinking to be had around doing something like that. So maybe
I object.
You object?
I object. My notes are too brilliant. They should never be
Never moved
trashed.
to a trash can?
Yes.
How about the golden throne?
Okay.
Yeah, maybe the golden throne. All right.
No politics, please, Michael.
So I'll throw it in the chat, just trash can, work on trash can. Anybody else have any other topics they want to discuss on?
I have a real fast one.
All right.
I ran into a little issue where Tinderbox dances at me, gets a little angry at me. It's when I have two notes that have the same name and I'm in preview mode. If one's earlier in the outline, I can have a note open. And if I press preview, it will show me the preview of an earlier note.
Yep, let me raise my hand on that. I have been struggling.
Yeah, I knew you'd have the answer.
So the answer is the answer is, and we can actually demonstrate it. It is I don't want to call it a bug. Let's call it a feature. It's something that was introduced into 9.5. And to the best that Mark Anderson and I have been able to determine is if the notes are of the same name, or if they haven't been previewed before, you get this experience where they jump to the top. And maybe for those that are listening, Mark and I can re-render the demonstration real quick, or if you want to, you can demonstrate it to us.
I think I can see what's happening. I mean, there are a couple of long-standing things applies. If Tinderbox is expecting one thing and it's given two or more, it will always take the first by outline order.
Right.
So it's very easy to resolve. Look up the outline order of whatever it is. There are some sort of exceptions. There's sort of some edge cases with agents. So an agent will always match an original rather than an alias if it can. But for instance, if there are two notes that it matches and it was expecting one, it will list them. An agent will list them both. But so the point is, try to avoid duplicate names.
Right.
In most cases, it sort of can be done. I mean, ATBRF is a really typical example where it's really hard. So I end up having to sort of pick names that I know will be slightly different. And one other quick one to just help you is that it's another good reason for things like templates and prototypes, which have a very deliberate purpose anyway.
Right.
People have their own rubric for it, but giving it a suffix or a prefix explicitly so that A, it's not going to be like any normal name, and B, that whatever prefix suffix you use will tell you, the person writing it, that it's a prototype or it's a template or something. So you get sort of two wins out of that. You avoid this problem of sort of a naming collision where Tinderbox doesn't know which.
Let me circle back, because I did rudely interrupt Bill because I was excited thinking I knew what he was talking about, but maybe I'm wrong. So Bill, is this the experience you're seeing? So if you have a note like this, and let's say I go to preview this note here, I select this note and I want to preview that note, and when I click preview, it jumps up to that one.
Well, actually, I'm in map view, so it isn't the same, but it could probably be what happened. If I'm in text mode.
Yeah, so if I'm here on note 1 and I go to preview, it jumps to that one.
No, it doesn't do that. I get bouncing outlines, that perimeter of boxes. They blink at me, and I can go to the text pane and I'll see one set of words. If I go to the preview pane, I'll see the text of the prior note.
Okay,
not the note that
I stand totally corrected. So let's talk about the issue I'm bringing up later. Can you share your
But
screen?
I think it's the same thing, to be perfectly honest. It sounds absolutely the same thing. It's probably just that there'll be something else, there'll be a rule or something. There'll be something else that's also trying to do stuff at the same time. But broadly, and there is I think it's called duplicate. Now, there is an action code that you'll use, once if never, that's specifically there. So if you've got a large document and you just want to find out what the duplicate names are, I can look it up. It is
so let me
has duplicate name.
Let me get to what I'm kind of looking for and why I'm bringing it up here. So I kind of get that, and there's a good discussion on the discussion board about having, P prototypes and T templates and all that. But this is names that have to be unique. And I'm sure, Michael, you've thought about this and have a methodology for uniquely naming things.
I do.
And
I'll happily share that with you. But can you share your screen with us so we can see what you're seeing, or is it proprietary stuff?
Well, I don't care that it's proprietary, but I'm not ready to just pull it up and find one.
All right, so let's go ahead and just I'll use my document and we'll pretend that we'll assume that what you're experiencing is the root cause,
just like what you said. That's
what I'm demonstrating here. And as Mark said, maybe you're getting other visual affordances because you've got some other stuff going on, but it's quite possible. And let me ask you one other question. Did you experience this prior to 9.5 or did it start happening in the more recent releases?
No, I think I didn't notice this until 9.5.
Correct. So I suspect this is it. And it took me a while to figure this out. But like in this case here, so you see note 1, note 2, note 1, note 2, note 1. If I go hit preview, it automatically jumps to the first note that's in the top of the outline. And so, as I said, even though you're looking at map view, Tinderbox renders notes based on the order that it shows up in the outline. So this is the note 1 in the outline. That's the note 1. We'll move that note there.
Oh, and in mine, note 1 in one place is not visible. So, it's off the screen. Maybe that's why.
So that could be why you're getting this sense of dancing or blinking, right? So Mark is aware of this. And now watch what happens. If I change this to note 3, you go to text. If I change this to note 3 and then preview, it's fine. Whoops. Sorry, I got to properly select note 3 now. Come on there. Now now it's fine. It's not jumping up to that note 1. So there's something that happened in 9.5 that is leading to if you've got a duplicate name, it will try to pick the first name that's showing up in the outline to preview. And again, just so we know, we're clear about what we mean by something happened. Because of new macOS security protocols, Mark in 9.5 had to go to WebKit. And moving to WebKit changed like more than we probably could possibly imagine. So the fact that he got it working as quickly as he did was a yeoman's piece of work. And so there's this, he is aware of this. And the fix right now is to make sure you're not having duplicate names. I have found on very edge casey things that it may happen in certain edge casey things, but I don't know if that's because of all the complexity I have going on. But the root cause we think is some duplicate name issue happening. Okay, Mr. Eddie and then Mr. Anderson, and then we'll show you a strategy for prefixes.
The issue of names, I've been fascinated by the challenges of naming standards, good names, et cetera, for nigh on 40 years now. And it's absolutely fascinating to see how it's been pushed down. It used to be in an insurance company in 1980, they had found 70 different names for the concept policy number.
Wow.
70 different names. So it's absolutely fascinating. I mean, there's in 1988, I went to a tiny company that had bid on a contract with a Pentagon to deal with names up to 256 characters long. So in 1988, they deemed that this problem was so challenging it could only be addressed with artificial intelligence. So you can imagine what the state of our AI was in 1988.
Yeah.
The rumor was we had a working product that did pretty much, but only up to about 40 characters because there was nothing commercial beyond that. And so since it was a working product, it was rejected. Rumor was they spent $15 million and never produced a working prototype. So Bill, that's the nature of the beast you're dealing with. The humans very easily understand there's a different context with this name and this name. Yeah. They're on just two different contexts. Computers don't do that. You're in a namespace.
Right.
End of pontification. Mark, you're next.
I'll just throw in a few to just round out a few things. One is that obviously in a note, in a map, all the notes are going to will be in the same container. So the only way that Tinderbox will know that Note 1 and other Note 1 are different is actually via its ID number. So that's how it copes. But if you ask it for something like, give me Note 1, it will go and look for Note 1, find it's the name of a note and give you that back to you. And the one that it will give you is the first one on the list of the matches, which is the first by outline order. So in every case, you can normally track it back to that. I put a note in the sidebar. There's a thing called is duplicate name. So if you've got a quite mature document, you think, oh, wait a minute, oh, heck, I've probably got lots of these. You can test. Is there an automatic feature that warns you if you're duplicating a name? As I recall, there was moons ago, but I think it got taken out in the V6 rebuild because the world had decided it was an annoyance. And the first thing they did was to turn off the thing warning them of duplicate names, often because they did actually want them. So it's just, I think the way to deal with it is just just take it as one of those things that you need to keep roughly at the back of your mind. If you know you're using duplicate names, you sometimes need to be a bit more careful. Then again, in most cases where you can use the name of a note, you can always use the path of a note. So unless they're in the same map, the paths will be different and Tinderbox will not be confused.
Right, and you can also use ID of a note too to be even.
And you can use ID. Then you have a different thing: is you're trying to remember which 10-digit number you're looking at, because that's what the IDs are. Because they were never they've always been there. They were never intended to be human read, and I fear I'm probably responsible for prodding way back in about version 4.5. Because there's something I couldn't get around without having access to the IDs.
Well, and thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate you for having done that, because I would say the 80% of my action code uses ID referencing versus just note name. But that's me. I can
surely. I mean, and if you're working in code, once it's working, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
It's horrendous. So if you were sort of logging all the calls you were making and you were logging the IDs number, unless you're very good at remembering multiple 10-digit numbers, I suspect you get a bit confused.
One of the thoughts I had was having I guess it's a rule that changes a name by appending on start date or something to make it all unique. But I think, Michael, you've thought of other things.
Yeah, well, I thought of this a lot, and so maybe if you don't mind, we can move into that part of the discussion, just playing with why you want to have. There's reasons to have. Let me pause here. Not having unique names is not necessarily a good or bad thing. You can do what you want to do. You do what you need to do. Prior to 9.5, there was never an issue with having that I had ever seen with notes being of the same name. I do believe in a future release, Mark Bernstein will address this preview thing, because, and again, it came in because of his moving over to WebKit, which was incredibly complicated to do. And this is one of the edge case elements that popped up in that process. So I suspect in some future release,
maybe I can ignore it.
Yeah, no, I would. For now, you would ignore it, and I can show you ways that I've gone around to, doctor, it hurts when I do this, so don't do that. There are ways, for example, if you're in outline view and you're trying to preview, and this is note 1, And for me, as I've talked about before, I'll have like note A, note B, note C. So let's say I'm doing this, and I now want to preview that branch, and I go like this, and it jumps up to 1. Incredibly annoying. So I've learned, doctor, it hurts when I do this. Well, for the time being, if I really just need to preview that, I move that one up top and I preview it, and it's fine because it's the first one in the outline order.
Yeah.
So there is a way for the current. So I would actually call this a bug, but let's be nice to Mark Bernstein about it, because it's something that we've discovered and he'll fix. But there is that kind of manual workaround for the time being. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
Another thing, I hesitate to mention this because, of course, someone will hear this and go away and think that this is a rule that must be obeyed. But another thing you can do is, if you have, you really need the notes to be on screen the same, because that's what, maybe you need to take a picture of it or something. What you can always do is you can actually use a display expression. So it might be called, two things might be called note 1, but you can give them a display expression that is basically something else. And the display expression is evaluated, and then the output of the display expression is shown as the note's name in the view pane, not in the text pane, but in the view.
You could do that, but I don't think that would fix the preview issue.
No, I just want to make the point that it's there. I mean, I first came across it because I was using I had notes whose names were academic papers, which included every single character you really don't want to put in a note name in them. And to get around this, I Bowdlerized all the names so they were safe for Tinderbox to use for linkage, but then I put the real name in the display expression. So what I saw on the screen was what I was expecting to see. It leads you down a different path of possible confusion, but I mention it, it's one of those things that no one needs to know it, but if you're in that particular bind, it can be a useful way to get around duplicate note naming.
Right. So let's define that right now. So let's say I really did want this to be visually saying note name, but I didn't necessarily need it to be named note name 1 or note 1. Mm-hmm. Right. So let's say this was note A, note 1A, but visually I needed it to be saying something else. So what you would do is you would hit Command 1. And you would go to display expression, and you would say name equals now. And let's say, and for the sake of this argument, let's just have fun with this. We'll go to my string. Right. So I've got my string variable, and we'll say this is a convoluted title. Right. That's what you want displayed, but the name of the note is going to be this. So if I go here and I say display expression equals my string, right, and hit enter. So what I see on the screen is this is a convoluted title, but the note name is actually 1A. So that's one way around to do it. I personally don't do it that way for a very specific reason, because I'm focused on output and outputting the actual name of the note, or actually I do it in a slightly different way. Outputting the name of the note or the prefix associated with the note is really important to me, and I can move on to showing you how I handle that now if you'd like. But before I do that, Mr. Eddie's got
just a quick one to quickly interject on display expressions is the route you're being shown I thoroughly agree with. If you don't need a complex expression as a display expression, just show the value you've stored. It's very easy to think, oh, right, what I want to do is I want to show, say, the number of all the children, the number of the descendants, my shoe size, and the date in Tibetan format or something, because I need to. And then you calculate all that as a display expression, and that's fine. Then you build your document out to several thousand notes, and the whole thing grinds to a halt. Display expression is best used for very, very simple things. Maybe one, basically showing another attribute after the name, or in this case, renaming it. If you need to do calculation, the way to do that for display expressions is calculate the value you want, store it in. So you could have a complex expression that in this example here was setting the value of my string, and then you just use my string or wherever you've stored the value as a display expression, And just that one little trick will, if you're doing complicated display expressions, will make your document much faster.
So let's show
Or it
you.
will at size.
And here's the other thing too to think about in that model. So and I'll show you two examples on how to do what we're talking about. So because you're not going to be changing your name that much, probably best to do it in an edict rather than a rule. And what you would do is you would say, you know, like my string equals let me just grab this real quick just so I can, let's say my string equals this piece of string text plus space quote plus child count plus that plus space owner quote plus owner. Right. So let's say you wanted this type here owner to be your display expression. And let's see, I think I did something wrong here. This is convoluted title. There we go. Plus
No, you got the plus inside the
yeah, there you go.
quotes.
Plus the quotes, plus this child count, plus this, plus owner. Did I get it right?
No,
No.
you've got a
Oh,
plus.
yeah, there you go.
You don't actually need that. I mean, if because you're just writing it, you could
Right.
like, this is a convoluted title space open square brackets, but that's probably not how we tend to think.
That's not how we tend to think.
It's
You're
this.
right.
Then I want an open
could've done
bracket.
that, right.
Then I want something else.
Yeah, I
But
could
yeah.
have. Right. So let's say I do this and I hit run. So now this is so my string equals this is a convoluted title plus this. Did it do it? Let's just make sure it does do it. No, it didn't work. There we go. So what we've done is we've run action code to make the title. So now if I go refresh that, you'll see now I've got action code running the expression. So as Mark said, the other reason why you wouldn't want to necessarily just do it in the notes display expression is this can be, again, it can bog down the file if you're doing it in this place. By doing it as an edict, it runs maybe once an hour or so. It does, or when Tinderbox has time to get to it, and it doesn't bog down the file. The way I go about doing that, and I'll just get out and we'll move on from this, is rather than using where'd it go? Where did display expression go? Here you go. Rather than using my string, which I used to do a lot, but then I realized sometimes it can that kind of generic development parking place can be ultimately then start getting conflicts when I'm doing other development. So the my string, the dollar my string, the dollar my number, I personally use all of those kind of system attributes for my like testing environments, but I never actually use them for my production code, because when they get into production, they could end up creating conflicts, between my testing and what I actually want happening in the file. So then rather than using my string, I have come to use the convention display expression cache. So I call this actual user generate, and I use this in every single one of my files. I have a user generated attribute called display expression cache, which for means I'm caching the values that are generating a display expression. So then I would go here, put display expression cache as my display expression, and then in my function I would say, in this case now, and this is where it gets a little better. So I can say display expression cache equals my string. And then that's why then ultimately you're going to have the brackets as a separate element, because the brackets aren't in my string. So now I can say display expression cache equals my string plus this brackets plus that. I hit enter, and then I think I need to go back and put a $sign. Yeah, I didn't put the $sign there. Right. So now I've got it set up where, and I've probably got the wrong note. Yeah. So now I've got it set up where display expression cache is generated by this my string plus the brackets plus child count, and now I'm getting my the appropriate thing I want. And in this case, sometimes what happens when and I've got a duplicate in here somewhere. Maybe I did it twice. Let's see, what did I do here? My string. And that's happening because my string has got that title there. So there we go. So now we've got the convoluted title, a child count, and then you can see, okay, I've got a space in between this 3. So now I can go back into my action code, put a space there, go like that. And now I've entered in the space. So that's how you work with that. Go ahead now, Mark.
Yeah, just a very quick one, because well, it was doing it when you first showed it, and it's a thing that sometimes confuses people. Occasionally, you'll make a change and something won't update. In this case, I think the first time you set the display expression, the text pane updated, but the view didn't.
Correct.
Don't worry. It's like that for a reason, because again, this is a tiny file, but if you had a really big file, if Tinderbox spends too much time dashing to update everything all the time, its activity doesn't go elsewhere. And not to worry, if you know you've done something, and basically what you want to signal to the app that you really would like it to refresh itself. The easiest thing is just click on the tab.
Go like this.
And it will update, well, the one that's active, but yeah. So the one that's blue at the moment. The red that you may have noticed, just very briefly, the name of the tab went red. That's just Tinderbox telling you it's thinking and doing its stuff.
And the other way to
effectively, there isn't a formal, redraw the screen, but that's a very good proxy for it.
The other way to do that too is, if you hadn't noticed, and I did it by muscle memory, I clicked Note A and then I went and clicked Note B, and then that forced Tinderbox to update. When I went back and made this note here the focus, Tinderbox, you want me to update this note, and so Tinderbox will update the note. So that's another way to force the update.
Yeah, a good reason in a sense to learn the muscle memory of using the tab actually is, I use one of these magic mice, and it's very, very easy to actually, especially in outline view, to move something. When you're just clicking on something and off to something else, to find you actually moved something, and then blink of an eye, if you missed it, you might have moved something in the outline. So the one nice thing now, there is that affordance, that if you do click the tab, you're explicitly telling Tinderbox, please, just go redraw the screen. Right. And it happens basically.
Michael, can you change the name of this note from Note 1A to Note 1?
Yep. And I suspect we're going to end up with the same preview issue that you have. So if I try to preview, then I got the same problem. Right.
Yeah.
So as we were saying, display expression will not solve this 9.5 previewing issue. But we kind of took a little tangent down an alley to talk about display expressions. But now we can go back and let's talk about, I'm going to undo the display. Here's a couple other things too. You can turn off display expression if you want on a note, and you can turn it back on too. So that's kind of a nice thing too, is if for a period of time, if you don't want those display expressions running, you can just turn them off using the display, either with action code or toggling that image. And then if you want to turn it back on later, you can. So for the purposes that moving forward in our discussion today, I'll leave it off for now. But that's also another helpful affordance to be thinking. Now, here's the issue. We've got this item Note 1, and we have another item called Note 1. And for me, and as you all know, I often use a lot of, I have what I call a resources folder. We talked about that last week. And when I'm thinking about my resources, I think about like entities. And to Mr. Eddie's comment of like, there's 175 terms for the use of policy. I also have run in, when I'm thinking through this process, is what do you call an organization versus a group versus an initiative versus a government versus an enterprise versus a company. And so for me, my brain went to, I'm going to call all groups of people or organizations, governments, things, I'll call them entities. And then I can use another, in this case, I can use another attribute, like a type attribute, and then use that type attribute to say this entity is a government, this entity is a company, this entity is a and let's just do that for fun, just so we can continue that. So so let's talk about so this is the first step towards naming convention. So we've talked about this a lot. This can be any any rubric or any syntax you want to use that works for your brain, I've defaulted to P entity, P standing for prototype. So I always label my prototypes, my user generated prototypes with a P and then an entity. I've chosen to leave the system generated prototypes. So for example, if I go up to the file menu and I hit the person prototype, I've chosen to leave the reference prototype is even a better example. I've chosen to leave the built-in system prototypes as is and not to change them with a P, primarily because Tinderbox actually has other functions. Like for example, if you drag in a reference from a reference manager, Tinderbox will automatically parse that, and it's got back-end logic that's looking for a prototype called reference. And so if I happen to have called this P prototype and I drag in a reference from the reference manager, I probably won't work now that I'm saying it. I'm going to do it. Yeah, Tinderbox automatically adds in the reference P reference. And then, and so to keep from that happening, I just stick with its nomenclature of reference rather than me introducing P reference on that. Interestingly enough, though, check out what just happened. Tinderbox has gone ahead and created me a prototype called tag versus slogan. And I don't know why, because it thinks.
I think it's just decided, it's probably just thought, because if you dropped it and the selection was on P reference.
Oh no,
no,
I know why. No, I'm sorry, because I dragged it into I dragged it into the prototypes. That's why. So if I go here and I'm in my reference manager and I drag this over, right, you'll see I've got this is called P reference. I drag that over. Tinderbox is automatically going to add that reference prototype. So I don't mess with that. Similarly, I don't mess with the person prototype either. But outside of that, when I'm doing my user generated prototypes, I always put a P. Now you can do any convention you want, but for me, that P, lowercase p, and then the rest of the name works. Similarly with that, my strategy for templates. So if you've got a template in here, I would say like T page, right? So to stand for template. And then if you're using functions, and I'll go ahead and add in the functions, I would use up here as hints. For functions, I would use like F this is a function, right? So, and again, this is important because if your function name or your prototype name conflicts with one of your note names, and we ran into this a few weeks ago, where we were doing a demo and a note name had the same name as a template, and then Tinderbox got confused because it wasn't sure what to display. So that's one way from an operational perspective to be managing note names. I actually, one could take it extend farther and like do, say stamp, like something for stamps, or call it S for stamps, but I don't like that. I just think it looks ugly. So I haven't done that prototyping convention for stamps, because my stamps are typically a sentence in convert APA to Chicago. And so my stamps tend to be pretty much guaranteed unique names, because I consciously label my stamps by the action that they're to perform. And so therefore there tend to be an action sentence that would be unique. And so I don't bother with putting an S in front of my stamps. So that's how I manage the back office here for that. And I always put in a separator so that I always know, and typically I will call this backstage, so that I know everything below here are my backstage function elements of Tinderbox. And then everything up here is what I'm actually, my work and what I'm working on. Now we can get to the use of prefixes and suffixes. Mr. Obviously, a challenge with such conventions is consistency. Yeah. So David's saying in the chat, the challenge of these conventions is consistency. The future you, since you're forgotten the convention you were using 6 months ago. Totally agree with that. And so with that in mind, sometimes I would add a and for me, I know them, and because they become such muscle memory now, I don't even think about it anymore. But if you were teaching or you were trying to build a reference file that you would want to be using or working within your team, and it wasn't just going to be for you, David's absolutely right. Either your future self is going to forget, especially when you end up with Alzheimer's, or you get really tired and really busy and you can't read your own code that you did even 2 weeks ago. Having some kind of syntax folder is really helpful. So in that syntax folder, you might say F means function, or what you could do is F, P, and I don't like that in this case it's automatically. I'm going to go back in and make them lowercase, and I can say, F in front of a name means function. And so here's our, and again, this is another reason why I have, and again, this is funny because now I don't want that character capitalized, but there's ways to action code to work around that. And I think there's a setting too that says don't capitalize the first sentence. But in this case though, then you could build this syntax folder. And the nice thing for that too is you're essentially in real time, not only creating something that you can use to remind yourself, you're also basically generating documentation, right? So that if you ever did need to write a report or document this file, you've now got documentation that you could publish along with your file. That is really useful. So let me pause there before we move on. Any comments, questions, thoughts, ideas on this so far? Or did I just totally bore you all and lull you into complacency?
A quick one. I wonder if it's something you're actually running that's capitalizing, because I just tested. It doesn't do that for me. So it may be.
Well, this is a brand new file. This is a brand new file.
Yeah, I've just done this. I've just done the same here in the current release, and it's not messing with it. And I can't. It's funny. It's just I don't recall there being a setting for this. I suspect there may be something else you're running that's doing it.
Well, iOS has that setting, right? When you start a sentence, it will automatically capitalize it. They may have done that in macOS too.
Yeah, but here I just hit new. You know what I bet it is? I bet it's Grammarly. So I've got Grammarly running, and I bet Grammarly's forcing it.
Right? Yeah, because I'm doing what you're doing, and it's not. It's fine, but
no, it's not fine, because this is actually a great learning lesson. The learning lesson is that you're sitting here blaming Tinder, or I'm sitting here for the moment blaming Tinderbox. What are you doing? When in reality, I've got another application that's interfering with Tinderbox. So it's not Tinderbox's fault. It's not a bug in the system. It's my unique context to which no one else would know unless we actually sat there and spent time to figure it out. So often too, when you go to the forum and you say, this is not working, it's kind of nice to contribute the context of, well, what else might be running? What else are you trying to do? And we actually just ran into this on the forum a few days ago, where someone was doing some work with Chinese characters, and the context of working with Chinese characters in Unicode in a primarily English-based operating system, which has been the Mac, is and given its history, there's not a lot.
I think we're losing you, Michael.
Okay, how about now? Are we good now or no?
Michael is freezing himself for
not
future use.
Cryo, Michael.
Yeah, I'm not intending to. Here, let me stop sharing. Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, so I think we came to the root cause of why that's happening to me right now is because I'm running Grammarly. So it's really, really helpful to kind of remember your context and not blame the tool.
There's balance.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
There's balance between having programs that try to think for you. I attribute that to most Windows programs, which I try to avoid.
Well, that's why I've stopped Windows programs. I just can't stand them.
But there's balance, because sometimes you do want programs that make automatic corrections.
Yeah.
I was just I just had a I had to miss a moment when Michael, you're saying you used to use the my string, and then you decided later then to do what instead?
Oh yeah. So I used to use my string for we're going back to the display expression.
Yeah.
So I created a attribute that I put in every one of my files called display expression cache.
All right. Okay. That's that.
Right.
Now understood.
So rather than use
use
my string, because I very well may want to use my string in what calculates display expression cache.
Oh, totally got it. Then I would do exactly the same. And also was wondering, is there a marginal or significant difference? I guess if you have hundreds of nodes, but if you just choose to use one of these abstractions for your display expression, I was following the Tinderbox way, where usually I think it says the $name plus then whatever display expression cache will read out. But I mean, you can include the name attribute already in that display expression cache.
So if I wanted to change my string to, we could go here and say name plus, and I do this all the time personally, because maybe I want child count, right? So if I say name plus my string plus child count plus owner plus that, and we hit enter, right? And then I'll go back and turn on display expression. So now we'll update that. So we've got note 1. This is a convoluted title 3 owner. So I do that constantly, much like what Bill was saying earlier. Let's say we want to also in this context add plus space plus date now. Right, hit run. And now we've added the date. Right. And if you wanted to format that date, and this is where I might screw it up, Mark. I think it's format like this.
Yeah. If you put format and then in quotes lowercase l, you'll get your locales. So that will vary for all of us because we're an international crowd here. So for instance, that'll give you different day or month order. It might give you a slash, it might give you a hyphen, it might give you something like a dot or something.
Now I could also do something like this, month, day, y.
Now, interesting question, use case scenario for you is when you put the date now, there's a positive and a negative to that, because if you were to copy and try to duplicate that note, then it would give you the date now of the time that the next note was created.
Correct. And so then what
is that date becomes a variable now.
Well, then what you could do is you could say, I would do this. I would say variable equals v date. Variable equals v date. And then v date equals, how about created? I'm just brainstorming here. You can figure out whatever date you want to have be created.
Yeah.
And rather, instead of doing that date now, I say variable equals v date. And so now what that's going to be done, and then we'll want to do up here, and we'll say format equals L. And so now what we're doing is we're interjecting a variable, say, make the date equal to this, and then populate that with a variable. So now that we've done that and we hit enter, right, we go back to that, and then all you need to do is modify that for that to become your date.
Perfect.
And to your point, if I now create this later, the next note created is going to have a different date, as opposed to
that's correct.
And if you wanted the full date, again, if we didn't want to deal with the if we wanted to actually have, and then actually Mark Bernstein just showed me this the other day. If you say equals, this gives you the I don't know what you call it, the UTC standard blah 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 format of date. Is it equals?
There'll be some standard number.
Yeah, I don't remember. Oh, yeah. So yeah, and so that's the equals. So if you do that, then you've got this is the way it comes out as a formatted date. And then you could use regex, for example, if you just wanted to grab the date versus the time. There's a whole bunch of other things you could do.
Sure. I think I found somewhere a list of all the, I'm trying to remember where I saw it though, but of course it's going to be an ATB ref.
Right. And
yeah,
again,
it's in the sidebar. I just posted it just now.
Yeah, and while we're at it too, I've started to really get into this convention just because I want to mess with my variables. So we can say like v string equals my string. And then we'll let's give that a convention too. So this is going to be a date. And so then if I do v string, I can replace my string with a variable. And then I can say, and so in other words, what I try to do with most of my action code now is replace all of my action code down here with variables. So that way I can manipulate the values that those variables become up, and I'm never messing with the code part. And I find that to be really, really convenient, especially when you're getting longer code. It's a really nice, convenient way of doing it.
So, as soon as this note is created, well, no, it's an edict. So it's designed to run cyclically. So then that the values of those three variables you've generated here, what happens to them? Do they recycle every time the edict runs at every node?
Yeah. Yeah. Just like they would otherwise. But the nice part about that is just it makes the code management a lot easier. So now if I wanted to do up here, rather than getting in here, then this is part of the reason why I do it this way. Let's say I wanted to actually have child count be child count plus 1 for whatever reason. We're brainstorming now. If I were doing all of that in this code, I could easily go into here and interject a typo unexpectedly. Whereas if I'm making child count plus 1, I just go like that. So it's going to be a lot easier to edit the child count output in that one line than finding it in a line of, say, 30 lines of code for that one little addition, when all I want to do is adjust how that child count variable is being calculated. So that's just so in a smaller piece of action code like this, that is not it's not as big of a deal. But when you're working with and I'll pull up examples, when you're working with longer forms of code like this, with a lot of variables, it makes it a lot easier to control that, because you can kind of control what's feeding into those variables higher up than what's ending up in the background code.
I got it. Okay, perfect.
Just to pick up Odd's point, the edict is basically, the edict evolved as a rule that wasn't quite so always on, because what tended to happen is new users would make lots of agents and rules and have everything running flat out, and then wonder why the performance didn't scale particularly well. So the idea of an edict is it runs on launch, and then it runs roughly once an hour while the document is open. It runs, if you use file update agents now, it updates all the edicts. If you have any displayed attributes for a note and you edit them, the edict will run. So it's reasonably intelligent about, stepping in on an ad hoc basis. And of course, you probably will notice that if you go to the edict or the rule inspector, there's a button at the bottom saying run now. So that's just saying, I don't care, I just want you to run the damn thing now. And it will slot it as quickly as it can into the overall and I'll do that all the time. I'll write my code and I'll hit that run now button because I'm impatient and I want it to happen right now. Yeah. It has to be said, especially in some of Michael's documents, if there's so much running, even run now is not instantaneous, because it's got to pull out into traffic and find a space. Well, in all honesty, if some of my larger files that have 8,000 or 9,000 notes, there's probably a few million operations happening constantly in those files.
You better start pre-ordering that M3 Max.
I'm ready. I'm ready to accidentally drop my M1 Mac just because to make the excuse to buy the M2. So anybody in the market for a really good M1 Mac, call me, because I'll sell you mine, which is like near new. Give me an excuse to go buy my M2. I mean, there's an interesting progression here, because I think this particular sort of thread started with, why don't you use my string? I mean, my string it indeed was an invention in about Tinderbox 4.5, because we used to have this convention of a started file. I can't remember whose idea it was. I rather typified it because I used to use it for examples when I was trying to help people in the forum, and that got adopted
So that notion of having these my stream, my list got adopted as the sandbox group of notes in Tinderbox 5 onwards, specifically to make it makes it very easy to write small sort of snippets of example code for people that are quite runnable without having to define any attributes. Of course, variables, indeed, well, typed variables I think came in version 9. Variables came in about version 6. And so there's also much of progress, because if you go back a ways, you literally had to just type that formula all up in the display expression box. And so don't be surprised, you may see sort of older versions of this that aren't quite as sophisticated, but that's all that's happening. It's just a march of progress.
Now, let me go ahead and, again, we didn't intend to do this, and I do want to move to the trash can concept, but you'll see here I've gone to the point of making all of the inputs into the display expression value into variables. Now, here's a really important, another reason why you'll want to do that. And again, I've gotten into the habit of doing this primarily out of muscle memory because it's easier and it keeps me from making typos and mistakes in the code, but also to be helping my future self when I realize that there's probably something I'm going to want to do with that variable that I'm not thinking about today, especially when you think about variables like sets. So for example, let's say the owner of this note, and again, this could be a task or something like that, but let's say the owner of this note is Michael Becker and Art Curran. Right? So let's say there's 2 owners to this note. So if I do that and I hit enter, and now I go and look at that note. Oh yeah, I gotta say vname equals owner. All right. And I'm going to show you something very cool in just a minute. All right, so then here's an example of doing that run now. So we're going to run it now. So now you see it says vname equals Art Curran and Michael Becker. And I've got your name here twice, Art. That's why that's happening. Okay, now here's my problem. In my display expression, I don't want this to be separated by a semicolon. Right? And the reason why it's being separated by a separate colon, it's feeding the actual string of owner into vname. So there's a couple ways. In this case, the easiest way to deal with that right now is I would say owner equals replace semicolon with a comma space. Like that, hit enter, hit run now. And
you're missing a parenthesis.
I'm missing a paragraph. There you go. Hit run now. And so now I see I've got my space. So if that was up in the code, I could easily make that, and the other thing too is when you start making more convoluted dot formats, dot replaces, that makes this a whole helly mess for even more opportunities of making mistakes. Whereas if you do it in the line of the individual variable, it reduces your opportunity of making mistakes. So that is a super valuable thing. The other thing, though, I might want to do, and again, this is a kind of a simple demo, and I can't think of but let me give you a more different reason on how I might want to do this. So if what I might want to do is say, well, what is actually vowner? Well, vowner. What I might want to do is something like this. I'll say vowner, and I'll also declare a list, vlist, and I'll call this one vlist, and then oops. And so then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say vlist, and I'll say vlist equals owner. So I'm going to feed the owner variables into vlist, and I'm going to say vlist dot each x, and then let's brainstorm on what we might want to do with this vlist. Okay, and actually, and remember when we were talking about IDs before too. Let's say, this is the better way. Let's say this. I'm going to declare a variable called vowner. I'm going to declare a variable called vlist. But instead of making vlist equal to the owner, I'm going to make vlist equal to the ID. Okay. And the reason why I do that is now that I've made vlist equal to the ID, there's so many other possibilities that I can do with playing with this. So let's go ahead and take a look at this and I'll show you. So this is the ID number of this note. And in this note, if I want to be calling this note, I can say, go get me the note ID this. And so now watch what's going to happen. I'm going to say vlist.eachx. And in this case of .eachx, what I'm going to be looking for is the ID number. And so now I'm going to say vowner equals the ID of note X dot replace okay. So now what's happening?
Not a typo on owner.
Oh, you're right. Thank you. Okay. So now what you're going to see, and here's another thing I might want to do too. I can also say, and now we'll leave it there. We'll leave it like that for now. So now what I can do is I'm going to say vlist equals vowner. So I'm actually asking, and again, think about this where vlist is not just one note like in this demo, but let's say vlist is like 10 notes. And so what I'm asking vlist to do is go cycle through each of the 10 notes, grab the ID of that note, replace its owner method with that way, and then insert that owner element into the into that place in the string. So what you're essentially doing, this is where the superpower is coming into play, is I'm saying for each item in the list, which is that ID, I'm going to make this, and I use X because I know what's going on. Mr. Anderson's been teaching me lately to, like, we could call it like IID for input ID, to help you kind of know what you're meaning by that. So
I might just to explain. So in most examples, I use either a or and. So it's an item, an X. Basically,
yeah,
for when teaching others, it's just oh right. So that's when inside the loop, you then use that thing again. That's where people tend to get lost. So it's the X or whatever you call it is the same. The reason you say each an ID or each X is you're saying inside the loop, inside the curly brackets, wherever you see X or an ID or whatever you've called it, and I mean you get to name it, so you choose. Then what Tinderbox does is it goes and gets the value of the current list item and puts it where that placeholder is.
Yeah, and again,
So
for instance, and a convention for me, and this goes back to our whole naming strategies. I didn't intend for our session today to be about naming, but this is another great example of naming thinking. Is I know that vlist is being populated with ID numbers. So the reason why I say NID is, okay, I now know that what's being fed into this vlist is an ID, and so therefore I can say, go grab me the ID of the note whose ID is X. Or whose note is in ID. And what Tinderbox is doing is it's saying, okay, I'm going to go to note 16756, whatever that is, blah, 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 56, grab its ID, replace its number, and do what I've asked to do. Okay. So that's how you go about doing that. And then I got to see what I did wrong. It should work. And it didn't work because of this. V lowercase l versus V uppercase L. So again, I try to be consistent with camel case too, where the V stands for variable. And if we go back to here, that would be another syntax per Mr. Eddy. V equals variable. Right. And then we can go back here and say, okay, V, and using camel case. So lowercase is the prefix of a note. The next thing is an uppercase. And then in this case, like count is a real word versus another word. So child and then count. So that's how I'm reading that as full sentence. And so then that's allowing me to do that. So if I do this now, let's see if I get it to work now. Okay, let's see, what did I do wrong here, Mark? vlist.each NID. And
Yeah.
it's not owner, it's ID. Right. And now I'm
But then
getting the
where
ID
do you-
number. Now, and vlist equals. Yeah, it should be ID.
I'm confused. Are you not passing
Oh,
off
no, I'm sorry.
some value into
Here's
the
what I'm
key
doing
value?
wrong. No, here's what I'm doing wrong. Okay, no, let's brainstorm what I'm doing wrong. I'm saying, hey, vlist, you're equal to the IDs. Now I'm telling you, make the owner equal to the ID. That's not what I wanted to do. What I want to do is make the owner. What I'm saying now is, for the note ID this, grab me the owner data. So now if I do that, hit run, refresh. Now I get it.
Yeah, so the line where you've got $owner brackets something, essentially that's what sometimes is referred to, you know, well, there isn't a formal name for it, but like I think the terminology that often bandied around is like an offset reference. In other words, give me the value of owner, or set the value of owner, not for the note that is currently in context, but the one is identified by the information I'm giving you in the brackets, which might be a designator, it might be an ID, it might be a full path, that sort of thing.
And again, here's why I do this, right? So let's go back here, and I'm going to turn off display expression, right? And sorry for sorry for making the mistake, but also not sorry for making the mistake, because we got to learn something, you know, by reinforcing that we corrected. So if you look here, this is note 1 and that's note 1. So how do I know which note 1 I'm calling? So I could go get me, and for the sake of argument, let's go ahead and add owner to this one. And let's call this one David Eddie, right? So now in this case,
You mean to put it on note 2?
What?
You put
Now
it
what?
on
Yeah,
note
so
2.
now here I could say note 2. Right? And now if I run that, and I'll turn the display expression back on, sorry. Now we're seeing I'm getting David Eddy. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, go get me the owner for note 2, which is David Eddy. But now that doesn't make sense in this loop, because when I'm feeding, because in this loop, I'm actually not feeding the ID. So I'm hard coded, go get note 2. If I go back to NID, I go back to that particular note. And again, I'm running all of this operation on one individual note. But imagine if this action code was on a prototype and it was running on a file of 100 different notes as it's building your report for you, or as it's building your display expressions for 100 different notes. And actually, let's go ahead and do that. So let's go here and I'll say prototype equals p note. Right. And we're going to take this display expression that we built here so lovingly and drop, and since we're playing with it, let's also do this. Let's say this is the function for display expression. Okay. And we'll say function f expression. Okay. Whoops. So that's our function for a display expression. And we know it works because we've done it on a stamp, or we've done it on an individual note, like that. And then I'm going to take the name of this function, and I'm going to go create a new prototype called p note. I'm going to add, I can leave it as a rule or an edict, but I'm going to put it as a rule here because I want it to run faster. And so now what I'm doing is I've got and we'll go ahead just so we can see this as I just love my little visual cue here. So here's and I don't actually, from a visual cue, I prefer that one for a note. The other one to me is a page. And so now we're going to go up here and we're going to add this prototype to every note. And we're going to now, so it's function display, and did I spell it right? Expression.
I think, no, what you need to do is you need to feed the ID of a note.
Yeah.
When you push something off into a function, it's less clear where it's working. So you basically, you can give it the name, the path, or the ID.
Yeah.
Obviously, in the case of the name,
Let's see if we can do it.
and then I think the phone works.
Yeah, let's go to P note. An expression. So the function, we're asking it to call the function of the display. Oh, I know why. I know exactly why it didn't work. And the reason why it didn't work is we need to tell every note in this prototype that it's getting its display expression from display expression cache. There you go. And now you see every one of them is updated. And this one's David Eddy, and that one's Art Kerman, and that's how you can work. And so we add this one, we'll call this one's owner. Oh, and then again, now that we have a prototype, we can just do this. And now every note gets owner. And I got to reset that one because I started modifying it. So let's give this one Bill. And let's give this one Mark. A. And who else are, and let's give this one Dave Rogers. So everyone now gets to part. And who's else with us? I think we got Erwin with us too today as well. Right. So now you can see that function is running on every note behind the scenes for us and keeping that updated for us, but also not messing with their names. Yes, Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, this is great. The only question I have is I may have missed it early on. Why is v child count plus or child count plus 1?
Oh no, that was that was because I was trying to make an I was trying to make up an excuse of why I was breaking out variables. So in this case, I wouldn't, in this case, I would never want to say v child count 1 because I want to actually know the real child count. The reason why I was saying that is before down here, we had child count. So imagine if you had a really long piece of code, child count like this, and again, I showed you examples where some of my action code has gotten to maybe 50, 60 characters long. And if all of these different operations were actually built into this one giant thing, the risk of interjecting a typo when you're working in the big chunk of code is a lot higher than if you're just working on that individual line. So I was using that as an example of why we or Mark Anderson's taught me to use variables because I can edit that line and it's gonna reduce the potential for errors just editing that line rather than messing in the big block of code.
Yeah, I just thought I recall something. There was an off by 1 issue error that's, I guess, corrected.
Well,
you're right.
You're right. That's a sibling order thing that Mark just fixed in the last release.
Right, and this is not a workaround.
That has nothing to do.
It's not in the it's not in the public release yet, but it was. I can't, and it was only if you're going in one direction. I think it was down in sibling order rather than up. If you set it, the fix has been tested and it'll be in the next release.
All right.
I was just going to say while you've got that screen up. It's a useful segue to say that another thing you can do, depending on why you're putting this information on the screen, is if you want to see a lot of things about each note, it can be useful. I'll wait till
let me just get this saved so we don't lose it.
Yeah, sure.
All right, and then all right, and then I'll give it the same name. There we go. Okay, so that way we're not going to lose the file. So I think
if you go to the view. If you go to the view menu and turn on column view, and you might just put in, say, owner. Well, just change that to owner. Just this, and now you can make these columns wider and things. But basically, this can be useful if you've say got 100 notes, and you'll basically. It's sometimes quicker than writing an agent or something because sometimes your eye is just really good at pattern matching. You can literally scroll the screen and find something. These are all niche things you can do. But the thing is, if you can have multiple columns. I wouldn't advise you to try and have sort of, like a spreadsheet and have sort of 40 columns or something. 2 or 3 is normally enough. But it's just worth bearing in mind. So if you're trying to do data review type stuff, it's good. And the other thing to bear in mind is, as long as a tab is active in the document, it will remember what columns you had set up for column view. So you can toggle them on off. And so it's a good idea if you're not actually using them, especially in a big document, it's worth turning them off. It's just more overhead. if you want to, especially if you're scrolling up and down the outline a lot, or you've got a big display. And column view is only in it's a feature only of outline view. It is there in Attribute Browser, but it's done in a slightly different way. But you can have columns in Attribute Browser, and again, it's extremely useful there, really for the same purpose, because you can actually very rapidly review data, and it's great for looking for missing values.
It's also really, really helpful when you're doing development, and you're writing your action code to do this, so that you can say what ID is this action code currently working on? Am I getting the expected results I want? Because sometimes you'll get results and you say, oh, that piece of text is coming from that ID, not this ID. Okay, I now know what's happening.
A good point. Sorry, and I see Art's hand up very quickly. Here's a very good example. If you click on ID now, and set the default is always 2 decimal places. Well, we know the ID is an integer. Unfortunately, it treats all numbers as numbers. But if you set that to 0, you can't at the moment get rid of the commas because it just wasn't. It's not designed for that. So you'll have to remove those, as it were, by eye. But you can. There's a certain amount of formatting you can do. You can format the format box is less for numbers, funnily enough, than for dates. Okay. So all the formatting strings that we were talking about earlier, you can use them in this box. So if you want to do, you want to just a part of a date or something, or just a time or something, again, you can drop that in. It's all written up in ATB-ref, so you can go there if you need more detail.
Let's do 2 things real quick. So let's add created here, right? So we can see that, or actually, we don't even have to add that. So let's add, because every note's got created. We didn't have to put the. And I'll show one other thing while we're at it. So there's the created, and if we say L, I think.
Yep.
There you go. And now we've got the date. And if we can, and I think we can do this like month, day, year. Yeah. So that way you can actually format dates. Now here's the thing, and then Art, before I don't want to lose the thought before we get back to Art. Now let's imagine you're me, and you've got a note with 3 books, 55, 60 articles. In other words, like 8,000 notes, or the book you're working on is a couple hundred notes. If you have all of that in one giant outline, it could really, really bog down, because every time Tinderbox goes to update this chart column view, it's going to update everything in view. So what you might want to do, so let's call this my report, and this is report 1. And I'm going to give that a folder, and let's call this folder my reports, and all of this goes under. Yeah, and this is where it kind of, to a certain extent, structure, I try to stay away from as much structure as possible, but in certain elements, structure is helpful. So let's say in this environment, I've got report 1, report 2, I've got this giant column view, but for the sake of working with the document right now, I'm only working on report 1. If you double click on this icon right here, it immediately collapses the breadcrumb just to that report. And then that will save Tinderbox processing power, because it's only processing what's visibly in the current list versus your entire document. And that's really, really helpful too, to increase performance and reduce eye distraction with other things you don't necessarily want to be seeing. Art?
Yeah. Hey, thanks. So just actually 2 sort of semi-random pickup questions. One is on the column view. Is there any way to address the column view settings? Because I'm just thinking, I typically, when I'm creating a project, I keep adding user attributes, and I want to have one gallery view, say, with all my user attributes only.
Okay. So finish asking your question, then I'll show you.
Is there a way to address it so that they will list automatically?
Yeah, there is. Okay. And you introduced a concept called gallery view. And so, to Mark Anderson's point, and sorry, I got excited and I wanted to jump in on your question. To Mark Anderson's point, column view I would not have on persistently, and it's for something you want to episodically get in and see really quick. And as you can see here, I can turn it on, and then I can go back up to file, and I can click around, I can do other stuff, and then I can go back to file and turn columns back on, and that stays. but it really performance-wise and frankly practicality purposes, it's really only good for like 3, 4, 5, attribute visually seen. If you're really looking to interrogate attributes, well, we've got a
Go to the attribute view,
we've got a
basically.
view for that. It's called the attribute browser, right?
Yeah, but
And
my only concern with the attribute browser, and maybe because I don't have the M1 Max, is that it sometimes runs a little more slowly, and that perhaps is why, because it has so much more to do than the outline view. And sometimes I just want to scroll back and forth and just, oh yeah, I haven't populated these, like a quick glance. That's why I refer to the gallery.
I would argue too, though, are you filtering your attribute browser using the query to only handle the notes, like that one particular report? So for instance, what we could say here is I only want to get, and let's go ahead and change the context here. So let's say I go here and I'm now going to go open up the attribute browser. And this is what we'll tend to do. We'll open up the attribute browser to our entire document. Well, that's not really what I want to be looking at. I specifically only want to look at the notes that are inside report 1.
Well, you
Right?
can do that most easily on the container. So that the query is most needed when you can't, if you've got notes that aren't all in one place.
Right.
So the first thing to check is if you can just say, show me report 1 or something.
So
That may be good
let's
enough
do
to
this.
do
So
that.
like we do this. So if I do this, collapse here, and then go to the attribute browser, then you'll see the attribute browser just defaults just to showing me report 1. But to Mark's point, if I am looking at all of my notes and I want to find that, I could just say, go find me the notes inside report 1. And if there are notes that are, if you have, and let me show you, since we're doing that, let's do this. If we go in here and let's say, sorry, the magic mouse sometimes automatically does that. So you see here, if I put note ABC inside this note, and let's go and call this one note 1A, go back to what we had before, or note 3, right? So now if you look here, I've got these notes here, and then I've got these notes embedded within that container. And if I go down, you're seeing I'm only seeing 3 notes, because the inside call to action says only show me the first set of children of this note. If you want all of them, you say descended from, and now I get every note descended from report 1. So
okay, I mean, this is great, but I just was hoping to get just like a quick overview way of just zapping out and looking at all my user attributes and see what I've been populating. And this is really typically when I have a few notes, not thousands.
Okay, and by the way, here's another way to do this too. So let's say you have all of your user attributes. Sometimes I will have a TBX config note, or not sometimes, in all of my files, I have a TBX config. And let's say you have your user generated attributes are these, and I'm just going to randomly pull some other attributes like this, right? This is kind of a little cheat that I do. So these are, let's say these are the attributes that I use regularly, right? What I'll do here is I'll go here, I'll hit Control A. I'll then pop over to the attribute browser, and up here, I'll then paste those there. And now I have all of the attributes that I want to interrogate. So that way,
that's perfect.
That's a real quick cheat sheet that I use. Now, for your case, what you might then want to do is, if you like that list of attributes, you go here and you say, where's the, oh yeah, you go here and you say gallery, and then give this, and then it will use the name that you give it. So let's go back down here and let's say this is report 1, right? So we're going to name this one report 1. We go to gallery and we say save it to the gallery. And so now I can always go back and recover that set anytime I want.
And is there any way of like directly placing that as with action code or something? You can't really talk to the views, right? Okay, just
not at present.
Okay.
One thing you may have noticed is if if you have outline view, a column view, set up an outline, and you go into attribute browser, it will take those as its default set of. It will assume you want the same columns. I think the reason there is a control is that nobody's prodded hard enough to really need it. One interesting change that you will see that is sort of shown here is there's a slight change. It is actually annotated as it happens in the guts of ATB ref. One of the things I just noticed when I was sort of writing things is that some of the newer views, so attribute browser, cross tabs, hyperbolic view, have a persistent control bar on them, because actually it's the view that's saved rather than the sort of working off the outline. The older views like outline and map are essentially it's done sort of NLS style. So you say what you want, you give it the control codes, as it were, the attributes you want. You say, no, I want to view this as an outline, or I want to view this as a map. And sort of what I'm seeing sort of changed here, and this is one of the things that's being discussed in fun enough in the moment in the context of things like trying to preserve part of a map. Because sometimes you just want a diagram, for want of a better word, it's not an ideal term, and you don't want it to change. You said, no, that's fine. I want to know this, and moreover, if I move the notes around, I don't really want them to disappear from the diagram. So you probably want something that's may well be like this, that may look. So where you've got a grid there, so that you might have something that looks a bit like a map. But I sense that possibly maybe a way some of the views are going, and it sort of makes more sense. And so it's worthwhile if you've never opened up the gallery, just practice seeing what happens when you put something in. Effectively, the gallery is trying to its genesis was basically someone saying, I've got 40 tabs, I have too many tabs, and I need them, because if I close them, my life will end. Well, you can save those. Once they're saved in the document, it has sufficient information that when you basically load it back in to the document, it will recreate the tab. There's no great overhead. Even for tabs that are actually shown, they're doing nothing in the background, in case anyone's wondering. So it's only the front tab that's doing all the peddling of rules, etc. Whereas you may have 20, you may have 5, you may have 20 tabs, whatever. They're not doing anything. And that's sometimes, if it's a very complex display, that's why if you change tab, there's just a slight delay while it opens up, because effectively it's starting from fresh, which is a good thing, because otherwise it's just using horsepower to no good effect behind the scenes.
And before, in our last couple of minutes, so at the very, very beginning of the conversation, we were talking about the concept of prefixes. So up in here in our report, we're getting unique names, we're doing all of this stuff. But now let's go here, and let's say we've got a company, and I'm just going to brainstorm some ideas. I got a company here called 1Password, right? And now I have another folder called products folder. Well, guess what? 1Password calls their product 1Password, right? And so how do I know? So and let's say up here now I'm writing my report, and I want to do a quick little zip link. How do I know which 1Password I'm linking to? How do I know which action code I'm linking to? How do I do that? Right? Well, you don't unless you're using prefixes. So I've developed the convention, and where I'll say entity, product, and then the other big one I'll use is terms folder. And so this would be like term password manager. Okay, so now if you're looking and I go up here and let's say I'm in this note, and now I want to do my zip linking or some kind of other thing, you'll see I can now quickly see, all right, this is the entity 1Password, and that's the product 1Password, and this is the report 1, right? So I can now start making a distinction visually in the app, which node is which. Plus, that guarantees, for the most part, you're going to get you have a better chance at unique names for notes. Now, here lies the rub. Let's say I'm running a report, and I'm just going to drop some export code in here so we can see this. And I'm going to say value name. So let's say I'm writing a report. I wouldn't do it in this case. I'd actually use a template, but for now, let's say I'm writing a name and I want to preview this note. Note 3, lorem ipsum, blah, blah, blah. And just so we can actually see and again, I would do this in a template. I wouldn't do it in a note because I would want to separate structure from context or content. So note 3, that text. Now, and actually that was a bad example because I want to do it in this one. Entity 1password. Well, you wouldn't actually want to write in your output of your report entity 1password. In this context versus here, what we'll say down here, let's say we do it down here and we'll put this in the product folder. Now, in the context of reading your report, this says entity 1password and this says, oh, sorry. I copied the text, not the, let me grab that. Whoops, shit. And then there you go. So now I've got value name. So now when I go preview the note, I got prod 1password and I have entity 1password. In my output though, I don't want it to say entity hyphen, and in my output, I don't want it to say prod 1 hyphen, because the reader from the context knows that I'm talking about a product versus a company because of the nature of the text. Tinderbox doesn't know that context, right? Because it's just a computer and you're feeding what you ask it to feed. So my convention with that is in every single one of my notes, I have what I call short title. Okay. So I'm now going to go ahead and create that string. So I have a note called short title, and I have a function I've developed over time, which I'll now paste in, called short title. And so what this function is doing is saying variable string short title, make the short title equal to the name. And I want you to replace any of these special characters because these special characters are related to regex issues. And then, oh, I'm sorry. What I'm saying here is start at the beginning of that's for a different thing. Start at the beginning of the string. So take the name, start at the beginning of the string, go to the first hyphen space, and then everything after is make that the short title. And then here's the really important part for me. If short title is nothing, then if short title does not equal short title, then make short title equal to v short title. And the reason why I do that is, and what ends up happening here, the reason why I'm doing that is it's going to be the name of the note unless short title actually has been populated. And the reason why I figured this out is I don't put a prefix on people's names. I'm not saying person space. So if a note doesn't have a prefix, what this regex is doing is it will use the name of the note unless short title has actually been populated by that regex, in which case it will use the short title. And so that's something I figured out along the way. So now that I've got this, I can take this function, put it into pnote and into its rule. And the nice thing with functions is also your rules get really clean, and you can you can delete rules and not rules, and it just makes it a lot easier to be writing. Mark finally broke me of the habit, and I'm like going directly into functions nowadays. It took him a few months to get me to break that habit. So I've got mostly using functions now. And so now I've got every note's being generated a short title. Now, watch what happens here. If I go back to our example code, which file here, rather than saying v name, I'm going to say v short title. Right. And rather than seeing, and then I'm going to go here and do the same thing here. So now what you're going to see is, oh, and that's because it doesn't have the note prototype. Okay. So now you're going to see 1password, so I did it right. And again, it's got to run through.
It's not got the prototype yet.
And yeah, there you go. 1password. Here we go. 1password. So that way I can have the name be different with its prefixes, but in my output, I'm going to use the short title, and then my reports will read clean. And so
this is really the reverse.
Yeah,
this is the reverse of the display expression in a sense.
Yeah, and in that regard, it's the reverse of the display.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And so Bill, these prefixes can be whatever makes sense to you, right?
Yeah.
I just happen to get term, entity, prod, whatever. And the other beautiful thing about Tinderbox is I cannot tell you how many times I've gone through and changing entity name. Started with org, then it went to ent, and then it went to something else, and then it went to gov. I mean, I've probably been through it to Bill to David's point earlier. I've gone through my 147 names of privacy policy until it landed on entity, but that was just work for me. Oh, Mr. Art.
Oh yeah. So this was another question. Sorry. In crafting an agent, and I wanted to exclude certain common containers, like my backend containers and things like that. So just so that the agent doesn't have to run on everything. What's the best syntax? You do use the exclamation mark and then each container.
Or what I would do is, again, one of the conventions that Mark Anderson often jokes with is friends don't let friends do things on root. Right. And root being, again, just so we're clear on what we mean by that. If we have a blank, this is the root folder of Tinderbox. So if you've got a blank file like this, note 1, note 2, okay, that's root. Right. And if I go to the outline, everything that you're seeing here is the root folder. So my convention for that is I put all of my work into a container called my reports or my whatever. And so then if I'm running an agent, I can say, hey, agent, go look in these containers and ignore everything else. Yeah,
You'll see that's exactly what ATBref does.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing. Oh, okay. I've been doing it that way, but I was just not to be lazy or anything, but if I could just have a generic line that works.
Well, the other thing you could do is Tinderbox does have an attribute. I choose not to do this, but Tinderbox does have an attribute called there it is, searchable, right? You could make searchable false, which would mean that agents or find or anything won't look for that note. So you can make everything but like your prototypes or something not searchable. That's another way to do it.
That's a great suggestion. Thanks. Yeah.
To be precise, they will be searched, but they won't be acted on. So in other words, they're just, they're found but ignored instantly because it's basically your way of saying, I don't want to have to define this, because actually negatives to tell what you don't want to find is actually rather hard. Anyway,
okay, but then
Tim's waiting.
I get it now. But then the searchable, so being searchable being off means it will be bypassed by agents or
no, but as he said, no, the agent will look at it. But for Tinderbox, it's much easier to say ignore false than it says does not equal blah 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 blah, because it's got to interrogate and investigate what that blah 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 is. Whereas false is really easy, just ignore it.
Yeah, I understand.
From
I was
a
just
performance
asking.
perspective, seeing, don't look at false versus evaluate this string is a much different set of operations.
I got it on the syntax point. I was just asking that if searchable is off, and this is an ATBref, I guess I could look it up myself, but if searchable is off, what are the different Tinderbox components that will ignore or bypass that note?
Anything in agent, anything doing with finding a note. So it would also, if you went up here to find, it wouldn't find, it wouldn't be, Tinderbox wouldn't display that as a result, it would find.
Okay, yeah, and because stamps, I guess you have to pre-select in any case before you apply them. Okay.
Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, I just did a quick Google and I think I answered my question, but I wondered how regex handles emojis. I'm looking at your prefixes there and your affinity for using symbols.
Oh, but that's not an emoji. That's a badge.
Oh, I know, but those are badges, correct? But you can use emojis. Regex will process emojis.
Oh yeah.
So you could put emojis in your prefixes there, which would give you that visual affordance.
That's actually a really good idea.
Still delete them via regex. I just thought that was entertaining.
Absolutely, that's kind
not
of
a big
cute.
Actually, it's worth mentioning, and I think it probably will be hopefully be fixed in the next release. But courtesy of playing around with Chinese word counts this this week, I discovered that if you have double byte characters in a string, and you take the size of the string, you get a number which is, well, incorrect. So basically, it's obviously counting more than it should do, and I can see what's happening. And anyway, it's been reported and it's known to be fixed. But as things are now, the reason I say that is as just as a slight cautionary tale in rushing to be really inventive with things like emojis. I would just do it. I'd do a small test before you dive in, because you may just hit it. I think it should work, but it's the reality is it would have been. It's likely to be less tested. So you may be the first person trying it and find out there's a glitch that needs ironing out.
Well, and on that note, I think the issue is, Mark, is that a Chinese character, a word in Chinese might be 2 or 3 symbols. And I think, wasn't it that the count, like,
no, that's a different thing. Well, the problem, as I discovered, spending far too long Googling it, is that word count is basically a Western concept. There isn't a concept of word count in Chinese. And the rule, as far as I can work out, is Chinese words are one character unless they aren't. So basically, unless you have a full Chinese dictionary, and probably one for each major dialect of Chinese, you're stuffed. So I think when Word says to you it's this many, I bet you bottom dollar it's making a guess, and I can see why, because if you Google on this, what you actually find are translation services that charge by the word. That's why they want to know, and most will say, oh, well, if it comes to Chinese, use characters instead. Too difficult, or use a rule of thumb that it's X% of it. So it's quite difficult. One interesting thing that did have me looking at is the dominant language field, which is part of the sort of this quasi AI, where Tinderbox is using stuff that's in the Apple underpinnings. So one of the things it will do is if you put in some Chinese into a field, you'll probably get you'll get a ZA locale back. Or was it ZH? I can't remember. But interesting enough, actually, I did that, and half of them were marked as Japanese and half as Chinese, which just shows it's all a very inexact science at the moment. And in fairness, that may be because actually some Chinese characters I think are used in, I can't remember which because there are two different symbol systems in Japanese, and the name escapes me at the moment. But one of them actually uses quite a lot of Chinese characters.
okay.
So I can sort of forgive that.
And last but not least, I know we've run super, super long. And if you wouldn't mind, I just want to, because I want to be complete. Let's say I go here and I hit, I want to name this file trash can, right? And I'm going to go here, I'm going to get a folder. And let's say I'm up here and I want to throw away report number 1. I'm going to go and create a stamp, and I'm going to call it trash can. And I'm going to say, container equals trash can, right? So by doing that, I can now move report 1 into the trash can. So you can effectively build your own trash can. Here's the problem with just doing it this way is, what if I want to put it back, right? So you could obviously manually put it back, but what you could also do is create yourself your own original attribute and say new, and you say container orig for container original, and that's a string. And then if you go to your stamp, before you move it, you say container orig equals container, right? So what this code's saying is make my container orig to my current container and now move me to the trash can. So now if I apply that, I'm now on the trash can, and if I add container orig here, you'll see it knows what my original container was. So now I can put a new stamp in, that says container equals container orig. Okay. And so now sorry, my magic mouse does that. I can hit and apply this recover stamp to report one, and it will put it back. Right. And so then you can get a lot fancier. You could say when you move it to the trash can, change its color, underwrite it, turn off its edicts, turn off its rules. Because if it's in the trash can, you don't want all of its edicts and rules running. So that's when you want to start thinking, well, what else do I want the function of trash can doing for me? But that's a real
interesting observation.
Go ahead.
Just note on screen. You'll note that when you put it back, you may need to adjust it. It's sort of its sibling order, because it'll get added at the end of
it gets added at the bottom. It gets added in at the bottom. But then that's where you'll want to have maybe a sort running on that folder. But again, all of that, and as we approach Tinderbox, I think it's really important for us to think about. You'll see on the forum, people will say, well, every app has a trash can. Well, the reality is most don't, or a lot don't. And what process do you want? So the same one you could do here too is you could actually create a sort order user generated attribute. So you can retain the sort order that works for you. I mean, you just personalize it to whatever works for you, as opposed to making the assumption that this is the way everything's done, because that's what I learned Microsoft Word does.
Oh, a related question, is the sort order and the sibling order, are they interrelated?
Well, yes and no. But so let's go ahead and turn on columns. Right. So we'll use columns, and let's put sibling order, and let's talk about what we're doing here. Right. So let's say, and then we will let you go because we're running long here. But let's say I'm now going to move my report ones here. And so the sibling order here is 1 and 2. And so now I'm going to move this to the trash can. And so now it's in the trash can. It's a sibling order 1 in the trash can. And now I'm going to recover it. So Tinderbox is going to put it back in at the last list in my report, and it's sibling order number 2. Now, if you wanted to retain that, let's go back and do that same method we did before. We'll create a new order, new attribute. We'll call it sort order. Orig, just to keep our convention. And remember, you want to come up with whatever convention works for you. So that's my sort order orig or sort order, whatever you want it. We'll make that a number. We'll go to our stamp, and we'll make in our trash can stamp, we're going to say sort order orig equals sibling order, like that. Okay, so now when I put this up here and I throw that one away, I've got my sibling order now here as 1. And if I now go and sort my folder to sibling order, when I put this back,
that's actually chasing its tail. The sibling order is
oh,
just,
you're right,
the current.
Because that's going to make it 2 again.
Yeah.
Oh no,
there are two different things. No.
The
point is, you don't need a sort. You don't need a sort because you set it. You recorded where it was in the outline order. As of the next release, if you set a sibling order lower than the current one, it will be 1 higher than it should be. That will be fixed in the next release, because the whole idea of sibling order being settable by the user is exactly this sort of thing. Right. So no, I want to put it back, and I want to put it back at number X. Right. And Tinderbox will shut all the other ones down, and it'll be correct. In this demo now, if you try and set it to 1, it will end up as 2.
Yeah, you're right. That was a bad example. But again, there's a great example of you needing to work through the logic to figure out what actually works. Right. I thought it was going to work. It didn't. So then I just go, okay, that didn't work. And now I'll figure out what's next. But, well,
it will work. It will work in the next. It will work in the next release.
Yeah. Okay. So, so now we're complete. We actually did everything we intended to do on the agenda, plus a ton more. So it's 10:46. We're about 16 minutes longer. Any final parting remarks from today's session? Comments, thoughts, ideas, questions?
Great session. This was
just a lot of thanks.
Yeah. Was it useful for you all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. All right, guys, I'm gonna go to the flea market with my son. So I will catch you later, and I'll put this up when I get back.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
See you, everybody.